Hello, friends. Welcome to a 30-minute delay for our nightly show at 11 p.m., but this one is the monthly show on Faith and Doubt. For those of you that don't know, I got multiple shows, one of which just came to an end, the Little Nugget Show. A post-game analysis of the Denver Nuggets, but their worthless year came to an end. So we're moving on with the Grow Show, which is a nightly show, basically, about growing cannabis, and then a weekly show called Eyes to See with discussions of current events and politics. But this one, ladies and gentlemen, this one is the monthly special that we try and do at the end of the month, but we had quite an end of the April month here with games and playoffs and whatnot. So this is essay number 4, which would be end of January, February, March, now April, even though it's May. So I've been writing papers on most of my shows, but then I kind of got away from it. But you can't get away from it on this one. This is the doozy. And if you're interested, go back and watch the first 3 episodes, and maybe I'll put the papers up themselves as like a link in the bio, in the description. But this one's a little longer than normal, but that's fine because we have an opportunity to examine the deeper questions in life. So I titled this one. I forgot to title the last one, but this one is titled. Also, before I get started, go ahead and put me on 1.5 speed because I will sound smarter and you can get through it quicker. And you'll probably still be able to understand. So now that you've done that, oh, I never put this show on Twitch. Too bad. Let's dig down next to the fireplace here, like my thumbnail indicates, smoking a pipe of tobacco and examining the deeper questions. Okay, this one's titled When Suffering Cross-Examines Belief. Think about it. There are questions a man can ask when life is quiet, and there are questions he only asks after something has been broken. The first kind can be handled with books, coffee, podcasts, clever conversations, and a little distance from the thing being discussed. We can sit around and talk about God, meaning, morality, death, justice, and the soul with a kind of calm intelligence, as long as none of those questions have placed their hand directly on our chest or around our neck. The second kind of question is different. It does not arrive as an idea. It arrives as a cancer diagnosis, a death, a funeral, a betrayal, a collapsed marriage, a child in trouble, a prayer that seems to go unanswered, a body that no longer functions, or the terrible silence that follows when the life you thought you were living is no longer the life you are living. And when that happens, the question changes. It's no longer, what do I believe? It becomes, can what I believe survive reality? That is a much harder and more honest question. Most people have a worldview based in comfort. Most people have an explanation of life when the lights are on. The bank account is steady, the body works just fine, and the people they love are still close enough to touch. Under those conditions, belief can remain very tidy. It can be arranged neatly on the shelf. It can be spoken about with confidence. It can sound noble, reasonable, spiritual, intellectual, even brave. But suffering as a way of walking into the room with a baseball bat, smashing your hopes and dreams, and turning around and walking out. It does not ask whether your beliefs are cool, hip, or attractive. It asks whether they can bear the weight of reality. In January, we talked about worldview, not as a label, not as a team jersey, but as the operating system underneath each human life. We said every person is already answering questions about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, whether they admit it or not. Go back and check that out if you don't know what we're talking about. In February, we talked about certainty and how dangerous it is to confuse the feeling of stability with the fact of truth. In March, we talked about the performance of belief, the strange modern habit of speaking as though we believe something while living as though some other authority is actually in charge. And tonight, here at the end of April, beginning of May, those three ideas meet the oldest interrogator in human history: suffering. Suffering does not just challenge what we believe about God, meaning, morality, and destiny. It exposes whether those beliefs were ever deep enough to bear the weight of real life. I've said before, at least I've felt for a long time, that life often seems like an endless river of suffering, with brief respites of calm. That may sound too dark when things are going well, but it does not sound dark at all to the person standing in the middle of the rushing waters. To that person, it may sound like the first honest thing anyone has said all day. Human life is not one long, uninterrupted blessing with the occasional problem. For many people, it feels much closer to one long struggle interrupted by moments of peace, laughter, beauty, friendship, love, food, music, children, sunlight, forgiveness, and rest. And those little respites matter. They're not fake. They may even be gifts. But they don't cancel out the turmoil of the river. The river keeps moving. This is where cheap answers about suffering become offensive. Not just wrong, but offensive. There's a kind of religious answer that tries to make suffering behave itself too quickly. It rushes into the wound with the slogan, "Everything happens for a reason. God has a plan. And just have faith." And there may be truth buried somewhere near those phrases, but truth handled carelessly can become cruelty. A man who has just buried his son does not need a greeting card theology tossed at his grief like a wet towel. A woman whose life has been shattered does not need someone explaining providence before they have even had the decency to sit beside her in silence. But there's also a cheap, skeptical answer. And it's no better. It sees suffering and immediately says, "There, that proves it. There is no God. And that proves there is no meaning. And that proves the world is only chaos, appetite, accident, and decay." But that answer also moves too quickly. It pretends to be brave because it's bleak. But bleakness is not the same thing as courage. Sometimes despair is just certainty dressed in black. The skeptical objection has its own hidden problem. When a person looks at suffering and calls it wrong, unjust, tragic, or evil, he is already appealing to some moral standard beyond mere preference. He is not simply saying, "I dislike this." He is saying, "This ought not to be." That little word "ought" carries more weight than people think. So we need to be careful. The religious man can be dishonest by explaining suffering too neatly. The anti-religious can be dishonest by using suffering too quickly. Both can turn pain into a weapon for a position they already held. Both can stand outside the wounded and make speeches. However, suffering is not primarily a debate topic. It's more of an examination. It cross-examines all of us. The ancient question still lingers with us. How can an all-powerful and good God allow endless suffering? That question may be one of the most serious questions a human being can ask. If God is good, why is the world so full of agony? If God is powerful, why isn't evil just eliminated? If God loves us, why does he permit betrayal, disease, cruelty, loss, madness, violence, and death? Why are children born into pain? Why do the wicked prosper? Why do prayers sometimes seem to rise to an empty sky? And why does the river of suffering keep moving? I do not pretend that one essay can answer that question fully. Any man who claims he can solve the suffering of the world in a few clean paragraphs should be treated with suspicion. But I do think Christianity offers a strange and yet serious answer. An answer that is often misunderstood. That answer begins with freedom. If love is to be real, it cannot be coerced. If obedience is to be meaningful, it cannot be merely mechanical. A creature that has no capacity to reject the good that's offered also has no meaningful capacity to choose the good. If God wanted puppets, he could have made puppets. If he wanted machinery, he could have made machinery. If he wanted creatures who obeyed without the possibility of denial, rebellion, pride, or sin, then human life as we know it would not exist. But it's the very freedom that makes love meaningful that also allows evil. That's not a small thing. It's not an emotional trick. It's built into the structure of moral life. A forced yes is not the same as a chosen yes. Just think about your kids. Going off script here. Anyone that has kids understands. There's nothing more rewarding than when a child chooses to obey, chooses to honor you, chooses to follow your direction and advice, and chooses to try and please you. That's not the same as forcing them, because it cannot be forced. Underneath the surface of forcing is illegitimate. And that's what it comes down to. If you ever need an example or an analogy or a metaphor of the deeper questions in life or how God relates to humans, just think about a father and a son, a mother and a daughter, a father and a daughter, a mother and a son. And those relationship dynamics and what makes them pure. Anyway, back to the paper here. Okay, love that cannot refuse is not love in the deepest sense. It might be order, it might be compliance, it may be design, but it is not the terrible and beautiful drama of a free soul turning toward the good when turning away is an option. And along with that freedom comes the opportunity for rejection, disobedience, and the destruction of what's good through pride. Sin is another word that modern people often misunderstand. They hear it as a list of forbidden pleasures, usually enforced by grim people who seem suspicious of happiness. But sin is much deeper than just rule breaking. Sin is the disordering and dismantling of reality. It's the creature placing itself where the Creator belongs. It is pride, appetite, fear, resentment, and self-will, declaring independence from truth. It is not merely doing bad things. It's the turning of the soul away from the source of good things, and then acting surprised when death and destruction begin to show up in everything. If God is perfect, then sin cannot simply be shrugged off. Perfection cannot make peace with corruption. Perfection cannot reconcile with the imperfect. A pure, holy God cannot call evil good just because we would find it more emotionally convenient. This is one of the places where modern people want a contradiction without any consequence. We want God to be good, but we also want him to turn a blind eye to evil. We want justice, but not judgment. We want mercy, but not repentance. We want to be healed, but we don't want to admit that we caused the disease. A broken world is what you get when free creatures turn away from the source of life. Not because every individual instance of suffering can be traced in some simplistic way to one particular sin. That is another cheap answer and a dangerous one. The man with cancer is not necessarily being punished. The grieving mother is not necessarily being corrected. The child born into pain is not a theological object lesson for spectators. The world is more complicated and more wounded than that. But Christianity does say that something is wrong, not only with individuals, but with all of creation itself. The world is not as it was meant to be. It is cracked, it is groaning, it is beautiful, but not whole. The world still carries the fingerprints of God, but it also carries the fractures of rebellion. This is why life can be so magnificent and so brutal at the same time. This is why a sunset can break your heart with awe and beauty, while a hospital room down the street breaks another heart with grief. This is why love feels eternal, even though everyone we love is mortal. This is why we know the world is good enough to be grateful for and broken enough to weep over. This is where Christianity refuses both shallow optimism and shallow despair. It does not say suffering is imaginary. It does not say evil is just a misunderstanding. It does not say death is natural in the sense that it belongs in the heart of things. It instead calls death the enemy. It calls sin and destruction a catastrophe. It calls the world broken, but it also says the brokenness is not the end of the story. The Christian claim is not that God looked down on human suffering from a safe distance and merely published a self-help book. The Christian claim is far more shocking than that. It is that God entered the world he made after it became corrupted. That a perfect God entered space and time, entered into our history, entered into flesh, entered into hunger, exhaustion, betrayal, humiliation, injustice, blood, and death. If I can say it this way, God stepped into the simulation he created, not as a tourist, not as a consultant, not as a distant architect checking on a malfunctioning machine, but as a man, as one of us. That's the scandal at the center of Christianity. God did not merely explain suffering. He inhabited it. This matters because many people assume the Christian answer to suffering is an argument. It is not at its center an argument. It is a person. It is a sacrificial lamb crucified. It is God taking into himself the full weight of human evil, human violence, human cowardice, human betrayal, and human pain. The cross does not answer every emotional question we have in the moment we ask it. It does not tell every grieving person why this loss happened on this day in this way. But it does tell us something enormous. God is not indifferent to suffering. God is not untouched by the wound. God is not standing above the river shouting instructions to drowning men. He is in the river. And more than that, Christianity says he entered it as a sacrifice. The world needed rescuing. Sacrifice is not divine cruelty. It is not God the Father losing his temper and taking it out on the Son, as some caricature it. Some people caricature it. Caricature. It is God himself proving what humanity could not prove. It is God bearing the cost of reconciliation. It is justice and mercy meeting in one terrible and beautiful act. Humanity broke the covenant. Humanity disobeyed. Humanity turned from perfection. And instead of abandoning the world to the consequence of its rebellion, God comes into the world as a perfect offering, a spotless lamb, a spotless life, the obedient Son, the one human being who lives completely under the truth and then gives himself for those who did not. That is not sentimental. That is not soft. That is not religious decoration. It's either the deepest hope in the world or the world is nothing. There's not much room in the middle. Because if Christ is not who Christianity says he is, then the cross is only another execution in a long history of human cruelty. Another innocent man crushed by power, another body in the river. But if Christ is who Christianity says he is, then the cross is the place where God opens a door in the wall of a broken world. It's a place where sin is judged. Mercy is offered. Death is invaded. And hope becomes more than optimism. Hope is not the denial of suffering. Hope is the refusal to grant suffering any authority. That distinction matters. Optimism says a thing should get better, it probably will get better. Hope says that even if it doesn't get better, evil does not get the last word. Things are still going to be okay, even if they don't go the way you want them. That's hope. That ain't optimism. Optimism depends on circumstances. Hope depends on something deeper than circumstances. Optimism can be shattered by a phone call. Hope may be wounded by the phone call, shaken by it, brought to its knees, but if it's rooted in something solid, then it can rise again. This is why suffering reveals what we actually believe. A man says he believes in God, but suffering may reveal that what he really believed in was a God who would keep his life manageable. or blessed, or the way he wanted it. A woman may say she believes in meaning, but suffering may reveal that her meaning was built entirely on circumstances being favorable. A skeptic may say he only believes in reason, but suffering may reveal that beneath his reason there is a moral outrage he cannot justify with matter alone. A religious person may say he trusts God, but suffering may reveal that he was actually trying to use God as insurance against pain. That is not an accusation from above. That is an accusation that finds all of us eventually. Because pain is a way of revealing the false contracts we thought we had signed with reality. Somewhere in the basement of the soul, many of us believe things we would never say out loud. If I am decent, I will be protected. If I pray, I will be spared. If I work hard, life will reward me. If I love people, they will not leave. If I follow God, he will keep the worst things away from my door. These are not always doctrines. They are assumptions. And when life violates them, we feel not only hurt, but betrayed. But perhaps what has been betrayed is not faith. Perhaps what has been betrayed is a bargain we mistook for faith. Real faith is not a bargain with God to avoid suffering. Real faith is trust in God through suffering. That doesn't mean the faithful person does not grieve. It does not mean he does not question or doubt. Hey, wait, that's what this show is called, On Faith and Doubt. It does not mean he does not sit in the dark and ask why. Read Psalms. Read Job. Read Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. The Bible is not nearly as fragile as some religious people are. It has room for lament and anguish. It has room for the cry of the abandoned, the suffering. What it does not have room for is the lie that pain is meaningless simply because we cannot master it or make it go away. There is a strange mercy in that, because if suffering is only meaningless, then endurance is merely biological stubbornness. If suffering is only chaos, then courage is beautiful but ultimately absurd. If suffering is only the movement of atoms through an indifferent universe, then our protest against evil is emotionally understandable, but metaphysically homeless. We may still hate suffering, of course. We may still fight it. We may still comfort one another. But the deeper question remains, why do we feel so certain that suffering is a violation rather than merely an event? Christianity says we feel that way because we were made for something else. We were not made for death. We were not made for betrayal, for destruction, for sin, for the endless river as we now experience it. We were made for communion with that which is good, to be engaged in the perfect. We were made for communion with God, with one another, and with creation rightly ordered beneath him. The pain we feel is not evidence that we expected too much from life. It may be evidence that we were made for more than this life can currently give. Make sure I didn't skip a page there. Why did I not put page numbers on this one? Did we already read that? Stand by. Of course, they're both ending on a paragraph. Okay, the injury can be one credential. A person refuses to learn. A man can begin by suffering evil and by using that suffering as permission to become evil himself. That is one of the great dangers. What the? I literally don't even know if I read that page because I don't think I did. Oh, no, I did. My bad. A man can begin by suffering evil and end by using that suffering as permission to become evil himself. Is that what I said? What the heck? Now my brain is just entirely shorting out. Give me a second. I'm going to let's find this freaking thing. Which one is it? I'm going to put the page numbers on it so I know where I'm at. We're almost done. I promise. Okay, how do you add page numbers? You got to go to the bottom of the page, go to the middle, insert page number, and we'll do that. Okay. So I know I have 2 left there, which is... That is one of the great dangers, yeah. And what happened would be a man can begin by suffering evil and end by using that suffering as permission to become evil himself. I did read that, did I not? Let's just hit that paragraph one more time. Take a break. Take a toke. Drink a Coke. Let the mind calm itself. Sometimes I just start reading and I space out and I don't know what I read. Why do I not remember reading that? Real hope makes a person responsible now less. If Christ-centered suffering, then the Christian has no right to float above it. If God moved toward the wounded, then we do not get to use theology in the way of wound. If the cross is true, then love is not a feeling. See, I didn't read this. 7, 8, 9, and 10. A man says he believes in God, but suffering may reveal what he really believed in was a God who would keep his life manageable. We definitely read that. That is not an accusation from above. That is an accusation that finds all of us eventually. I might have jumped to the wrong page after that. Because pain is a way of revealing false contracts we thought we had signed with reality. Somewhere in the basement of the soul, many of us believe things we would never say out loud. I did read this. Gethsemane. Okay. We were not made for death. We were not made for betrayal. We were not made for sin. We were not made for the endless river as we now experience it. We were made for communion with God, with one another, and with creation rightly ordered beneath Him. The pain we feel is not evidence that we expected too much from life. It may be evidence that we were made for more than this life can give. I remember being there. Okay, on to page 8. 8, 9, and 10. Here we go. But here we have to be careful again because some people use hope as an escape from responsibility. They speak of heaven so they do not have to love their neighbor on earth. They speak of God's plan so they do not have to repent of the damage they have done. They speak of forgiveness because they do not want to repair what they broke. They speak of eternity because they are afraid of the duties of today. That is not hope. That is evasion dressed in religious clothes. Did we read this? Real hope makes a person... It's crazy because I write it over the past few weeks So I don't know what I've read to you or just is in my own head. Real hope makes a person more responsible, not less. If Christ entered suffering, then the Christian has no right to float above it. If God moved toward the wounded, then we do not get to use theology as a way of avoiding wounded people. If the cross is true, then love is not a feeling we admire from a distance. Love bleeds. Love descends. Love bears burden. Love tells the truth. Love forgives enemy. Love feeds the hungry. Love sits by the dying. Love refuses to let suffering win. And that may be the practical test of this whole conversation, not whether we can explain suffering perfectly. We cannot. Not whether we can make pain feel acceptable. We should not. Not whether we can defend God in a tone impressive enough to silence every objection. That may satisfy the ego, but it rarely heals the heart. The test is whether suffering turns us toward truth or away from it. Whether it makes us more honest or more neurotic, theatrical, more merciful or more bitter, more awake or more numb, more surrendered to God or more devoted to the little throne of our own wounded pride. Here's an uncomfortable possibility. Some people do not want healing as much as they want justification. That needs to be said carefully because suffering people have already been accused of enough. Not every wound is self-inflicted. Not every grief hides a secret desire to remain broken. Some people are simply in pain, and the proper response is compassion, not analysis. There's a point somewhere along the way where pain can become identity. The wound can become a throne. The injury can become the one credential a person refuses to give up. A man can begin by suffering evil and end by using that suffering as permission to become evil himself. See, there we go. Now finish me. Last 2 pages. Let's go. Clip that one. I like that. A man can begin by suffering evil and end by using that suffering as permission to become evil himself. So many times that is the case, is it not? I do the same shit. That is one of the great dangers of the river. It does not... Check. It does not only hurt us, it tempts us. It tempts us to say, because I have been wounded, I am now excused from being good. It tempts us to say, because I have suffered, I no longer owe anyone patience, honesty, humility, or love. It tempts us to make pain sovereign. And once pain becomes sovereign, it will demand sacrifices like any other false god. It will demand your tenderness. It will demand your gratitude. It will demand your future. It will demand every relationship that asks you to become something more than the injury you carry. This is where Christ confronts us most deeply. He does not merely comfort the suffering. He also refuses to let suffering become the God. He bears wounds without becoming wicked. He is betrayed without becoming false. He is mocked without becoming petty. He is tortured without surrendering love. He is crucified and still says, Father, forgive them. That is not weakness. That is strength so deep most of us can barely understand it. That is how death was defeated. And if Christianity is true, then it is not merely an example to admire. It is a life into which we are invited, not by our own moral heroism, not by pretending to be stronger than we are, not by denying grief, but by grace. Gratis. By the power of God remaking people who could not remake themselves. By the strange possibility that even in a broken world, even in the river of suffering, even with suffering still moving through human life all around us, a person can begin to be restored, redeemed. That is the good news. Not that life will stop hurting. Not that faith will make you immune to loss. Not that God will explain every sorrow on demand. The good news is that suffering is not final. Sin is not final. Death is not final. And the door back to God has been opened by God himself. The good news is that Christ entered the wound of the world and came out on the other side carrying resurrection. The good news is that those who still wish to follow him are not being asked to climb their way out of the broken world by their own strength. They are instead being called through a door opened by mercy. So maybe the only question is not only how can a good God allow suffering? Maybe the question is also, what has God done about suffering? And Christianity answers that question. He entered it, borne it, judged the evil beneath it, opened the way through it, and promised that one day it will not have the last word. That suffering and death will be defeated. That does not remove the tears from today, tonight, or yesterday, or tomorrow. On this earth, it does not make the hospital room easy. It does not make the grave less real. It does not make betrayal painless. It does not turn agony into a lesson we should be grateful for before we have even finished bleeding. But it does mean the river is not the whole story. It means calm is not merely a temporary accident in an otherwise cruel universe. It means those brief respites, the laughter, the forgiveness, the beauty, the meal, the sunset, the embrace of a child or a grandchild, the prayer, the sunrise after a night you were not sure you would survive, may not be illusions at all. They may be signs. They may be little rumors of the world as it was meant to be, and of the world as God intended to make it. And until then, suffering will continue to cross-examine belief. It will ask whether our worldview is furniture or a foundation. It will ask whether our certainty has been tested or merely rehearsed. It will ask whether our beliefs are costumes or commands. It will ask whether faith is a word we use when life is manageable or trust that remains when life is not. A trust or a trust that remains. Faith is a trust. No honest person should answer that question too quickly. But perhaps we can begin here. If suffering has exposed that our beliefs were thinner than we thought, that does not have to be the end. Exposure can be mercy. Collapse can be coercion. Doubt can become the doorway to a deeper faith. And pain, though it must never be worshipped, may still become the place where false things die and true things take root. Because the deepest hope is not that we will avoid the river of suffering. The deepest hope is that God has entered it and that he already knows the way through. The end. I feel like I need to tighten up a few things on that one, but 'tis what it is. How long did that take? 45 minutes? Wonderful. Well, we have 0 viewers and 0 comments. Thank you for your support. So, it is Sunday night at midnight. Maybe that's why nobody's on the internet. Or maybe just YouTube doesn't want me to be seen by anyone. Or maybe the deeper questions do not apply to most humans. But if they apply to you, then give me a like, a subscribe, or a comment. For no other reason than it's really disheartening to put all this time and effort into this shit and not get anything out of it. And I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for views. I'm asking for interaction. I'm asking for conversation from people of the world that have I don't know, I always liked it when I was young. Didn't give a shit about school, I can tell you that. But I liked being around people that were smart. And I liked being around people that thought they were smart. And I liked learning. I'm obsessed with learning. And I like talking. I like persuading. I like learning to speak. I like learning to write. And so that's why we do this. And I know there's people out there that do that too. So if you're one of them, leave a comment and join me next month for another 10-pager. It'd be the end of this month, May 31st. Let's shoot for what day would that be? Let's have a look. Monday? No, another Sunday. What? It would be another Sunday. So be it. May 31st, we'll try and shoot for On Faith and Doubt, essay number 5. I don't even know where to go from here. That's another thing you need to leave in the comments is like, where do you go from here? I'm trying to remember a quote from a movie. I know the movie. I kind of know the quote and the time of the movie. I'd have to look it up. But it is, death is not sweet. I've killed so many people. I forget what it was. The voices in my head. Death, they're yelling and screaming, death is not sweet. From a tormented soul that had committed many crimes, I guess, against reality. And was being hounded by the suffering. But it had something to do with death is not sweet. But I want to rechange that. I'll look it up, I'll write it down, and I'll rewrite it. Because from this paper, we say death is not the end. It is finished. Christ has won. Death is defeated. That's it. Life gets a little simpler after that. And here's my advice. Life is a hell of a lot shorter, and it will be a hell of a lot shorter than you think it will be. I'm also getting tired, so I might be falling asleep in my own mind. Not making any sense. Oh yeah, I started at 11:30. That's why 50 minutes later it's 12:20. Still 0 comments and 0 viewers. Wonderful. Well, it's been real. Grandchildren, now that you're watching this, many, many years after I've been buried in the soil of my forefathers, just understand these simple things. Don't get hung up on the petty bullshit. Or even people telling you not to cuss. Instead, focus on what's real. In this world of pain and suffering, death has been defeated. Therefore, you got nothing to worry about. As I said, we're already dead. It's the same idea that death has been defeated, but you're already dead. You've already transcended death. You haven't walked through the door, but you know you're walking through the door. That's the difference between older people that have a legitimate faith as they approach death. They tremble. Or no, wait, the opposite. The ones with the legitimate faith approach death as a final award. It's the passage of this suffering, this life of suffering, into the next life without. But those who do not have that same faith or peace approach death and they tremble. They become overwhelmed with regret. And some may cry out to God and say, "Forgive me." Or some may go down swinging with the fist in the air. Nietzsche. So here's to you. Don't take life too serious. Know that the meaning of life is simple. It's to know God. And everything comes from that. And that's what we've examined on Faith and Doubt. And I pretty much feel like we've answered all the deepest questions in the world, so we're not going to do the show anymore. Just kidding. Please leave a comment on what you want to talk about next month. Otherwise, I'm just going to write whatever I want for 10 pages, okay? Good night, good evening, good afternoon, depending on when you're listening to this. Tomorrow we're doing a grow show, I believe. It has to be, right? Yeah. Because Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are going to be grow shows from here on out because we got no more nugget show. Thursday will be, oh my goodness, I'm going to do 6 out of 7 a week. Grow shows. Like, what are we going to talk about? Yeah, but Thursdays, we're going to shoot for Thursdays as eyes to see. So let's get in the mud there. Let's get mudslinging. Let's throw left versus right, Republican versus Democrat blows at each other. Let's be irreverent. Let's be racist. Let's be whatever we want because that pisses people off. And we like to piss people off. So that'll be Thursday at 11. Otherwise, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday at 11, we're going to talk growing cannabis. Why? Because we can. And if you learn how to do it, you'll feel cool. And I have a recommendation. Go to my main page. Matter of fact, I'll show you where to go. Just feel inspired here. Share screen. Is this one? Fucking Jaden McDaniels. Come on now, boy. Get off my timeline. Okay, so get into it. The Cavs took care of business from what I seen. All right. So you go up here to my channel or search for it like that. That's what it looks like. My God. And maybe a couple of you can subscribe to get me back up to 888. What the fuck? How does it keep going down? 887. It was 888 for fucking years. Then I start making videos and it goes down. Like, who the fuck is unsubscribing? Hey, before you unsubscribe, leave me a note, a comment. I mean, why would anyone... Fuck out of here. All right. Joined 2018. I feel like it was before that. Anyway, so go to videos and see this Jimmy Stewart one right here. It's the funniest video on earth. It's the funniest skit on earth that's been performed by myself. So, if you want to laugh, go watch that. Don't take life too serious and realize you're already dead. All right, good night.